6 years of my life. 6 years of bad coffee, fake smiles, and swallowing my pride so deep I could taste it in my shoes. And all it took to end it was one phone call from a man standing in his bathrobe on a Friday the 13th. I'd like to say I was surprised. I wasn't. What I was ready. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're gonna love it here. Allow me to rewind slightly, because this narrative does not commence in Paris. It does not start with that specific telephone call either. It begins on a rainy afternoon in March, 2 years prior to any of this, when I was elbow deep in a filing cabinet on the 18th floor of One Savannah Center. I was searching for a misplaced supplier agreement that Peggy insisted she had filed under V, and I was certain she had filed it under whatever letter she felt like that particular day. I never discovered the vendor contract. What I found instead was an aged manila folder wedged behind the hanging files, thick with paperwork that had not seen daylight since the Reagan administration. The tab was labeled Harmon and Equity Partners Founding Charter and Bylaws, Origin 1987. I nearly returned it to its place. Almost. I do not know what compelled me to sit down and examine it. Perhaps it was simple boredom. Maybe it was something older and more resentful than boredom. Because here is the reality about working for your father-in-law. It is not merely a profession. It is a daily reminder of exactly where you stand in someone else's narrative. And Buck Harmon had made it remarkably clear from the moment Shelby introduced us 17 years ago at a dinner party in Ardsley Park that I was a supporting character in his story. When Shelby introduced us, he inspected me the way a man examines a used vehicle he did not ask to test drive. He said, "So you're the one Shelby's been hiding. What is it you do again?" I informed him I was in financial consulting. He nodded as if I had said I collected grocery coupons. That was our beginning. It never truly improved. So yes, maybe what made me sit down and read that founding charter was 6 years of being addressed as sport by a 78-year-old man who built his entire identity on looking down at people from whatever height he could find. I read every single page slowly. I read it the way you read something when you have a profound feeling your life is about to shift and you do not want to miss a single word. I almost missed the detail anyway. It was buried in Section 14, subsection C, disguised in the kind of legal jargon designed to make your eyes glaze over and move on. But I read it 3 times, and then a 4th. By the 5th time, I was no longer just reading. I was performing calculations. The clause stated this: any employee of Harmon and Equity Partners who is terminated without documented cause following no fewer than 5 years of continuous full-time service shall be entitled to equity compensation equivalent to 18% of company shares valued at the time of termination. I sat very still for a significant duration. Then I contacted Randy. I told him to say that again. Randy said, "We were at the Rusty Anchor on River Street, 2 beers in. The tourists were gone, and the bartender was wiping glasses at the far end of the bar as if he were paid to be invisible." I told him to say it slower this time. "If Buck fires me without cause after 5 continuous years of service," I said, "I receive 18% of the company." Randy stared at me. He noted I had already been there 4 years. 4 years and 2 months, I clarified. He picked up his beer and put it down without drinking. He told me that is not a clause. It is a lottery ticket. I told him it is better than a lottery ticket. Lottery tickets are random, but this one I can control. I can decide how I make him fire me, on my own terms, after year 5. Randy looked at me the way a man looks at his best friend when he cannot decide if he's watching a genius or a man having a very calm breakdown. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked, "Does Shelby know?" "Not yet," I replied. "You need to tell her," he insisted. "I know, Craig," I said. He leaned forward. He told me I need to tell her everything, because if anybody in this world has a reason to want that old man brought down a peg or 12, it is her. He was not incorrect. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I already realized that. I just needed to hear it spoken out loud. Here is what you need to understand about Shelby before I proceed any further, because this story belongs to her just as much as it belongs to me. Shelby Johnson is 44 years old. She is the most intelligent person I have ever met in my life. She is sharper than any analyst on the 18th floor. She is sharper than Donna Merritt, who went to Georgetown Law and never lets anyone forget it. She is sharper than Buck himself, though he would sooner swallow glass than admit it. She has her mother's eyes and her father's brain, and she has spent the better part of her adult life being grateful for one of those things and quietly furious about the other. Buck Harmon married Darlene Whitfield in 1974. By all accounts, the early years were acceptable, but Buck had a way of leaning into his worst qualities the wealthier he became, and by the time Shelby was 12 years old, the house on Skidaway Island was not a positive place to be. Buck did not use physical force. He was too controlled for that, and too image-conscious. What he did was meaner and harder to prove, the kind of cruelty that lives in a tone of voice, and the specific way a man can make a woman feel like a burden simply by looking at her. He talked over Darlene at dinner parties. He corrected her in front of guests. He managed her the way he managed his portfolio, tracking every expenditure, questioning every decision, and making her feel like a liability he was generously choosing to carry. Shelby observed all of it. She saw every dinner, every dismissal, every quiet moment where her mother's shoulders would drop half an inch and she would excuse herself from the table and not return for 20 minutes.
Darlene finally departed when Shelby was 19. She packed 2 bags on a Wednesday morning while Buck was at the office, drove herself to her sister's residence in Charleston, and filed for divorce 3 days later. Buck's reaction was to act wounded in public and litigious in private. The settlement took 2 years and cost Darlene more than it should have because Buck had lawyers, patience, and a complete absence of guilt. Shelby never fully forgave him, not in the way fathers in the movies get forgiven in the final act with a speech and a hug. The forgiveness that Buck Harmon received from his daughter was the functional kind, the kind that allows you to sit across a dinner table from someone without picking up a fork for the wrong reason. She maintained the relationship because Darlene requested her to, and because Shelby understood that burning that bridge entirely would cost her more than it cost him. But she never forgot, and she never stopped keeping score. Which is why when I sat across from her in our kitchen table in Arnsley Park with the founding documents spread between our coffee mugs and explained Section 14, subsection C, she did not gasp, she did not panic. She did not ask me if I was certain. She read it 3 times, even slower than I had. Then she looked up. She asked if he had ever once read these documents. It was not a question. He inherited the company, I said. He inherited everything and never had to fight for any of it. Something moved across her face. Not anger exactly, but something older than anger and more patient. He made my mother feel worthless for 20 years, she said quietly. He made me feel like I married down because I married someone he did not select. He has called you sport for 6 years, Craig. 6 years. She looked back down at the document. She asked what I needed from her. Here is what you must understand about Buck Harmon. He is 78 years old, built like a man who was once physically imposing and has never updated his self-image since. He has a full head of white hair that he maintains with the dedication most people reserve for their health. He has a permanent tan from weekends on his boat and the handshake of a man who believes firmness communicates dominance. He inherited Harmon and Equity Partners from his own father, grew it during the best bull market in American history, and has been dining on that achievement ever since. He looks down on everyone, not occasionally or situationally, but structurally. It is load-bearing behavior for him. He needs someone beneath him the way a building needs a foundation. He made me VP of operations because he needed someone to blame when things went sideways. He gave me a corner office because Shelby pushed for it at a family dinner, and he could not say no in front of Darlene's ghost. By that, I mean the idea of what Darlene would think, since she had long since moved to Charleston and was living her best life and never looked back. He called me one of the good ones at the Christmas party in front of 43 people and thought he was being generous. The man had no idea what was living inside his own walls. The plan required two things: patience and provocation. I needed to complete my 6th year with a spotless documented record while making myself just irritating enough that Buck's trigger finger stayed warm. Not enough to justify cause, just enough to keep him simmering. Shelby called it strategic aggravation. I called it the most exhausting performance of my life. For 2 full years, I did everything right on paper and everything wrong in Buck's gut. I questioned his decisions in board meetings politely with data, which is somehow worse than rudeness to a man like Buck. I copied Donna Merritt on emails Buck would have preferred stayed informal. I took my full lunch hour every single day. I stopped laughing at his golf stories. I started arriving at exactly 9 and leaving at exactly 5, which in Buck Harmon's world was basically a resignation letter he could not technically accept. "You've been different lately," Buck told me one morning, swirling his coffee like a man who had seen too many movies about powerful people. "Something on your mind, sport?" "Just focused on the numbers," I said. "They're looking strong." He did not like that answer. He wanted me rattled. I gave him competence, and competence made him angrier than anything else I could have offered. I did not know it yet, but Hank Prudhomme, Buck's VP and personal shadow, had already started whispering in Buck's ear. He was telling me I had gotten too comfortable and that I was building something. I found this out from Peggy later, who heard everything and said nothing, which made her the most powerful person on the 18th floor. Then came the Paris idea. It was Shelby who planted it, which was the only way it would work. She brought it up over Sunday dinner at Buck's house, the kind of house that has a name instead of an address, and she did it the way she did everything, without drama and without telegraphing. She just dropped it into the conversation like a stone into still water. "Craig's never taken a real vacation," she said, refilling her water glass. "6 years, not even a long weekend. I want us to go to Paris, 2 weeks. Constance, Buck's wife number 2, a pleasant woman from Augusta who had learned quickly not to have opinions at the dinner table, looked delighted. "Oh, how romantic," she said. Buck was cutting his steak. He noted that 2 weeks is a long time to be away. "HR confirmed he has 31 unused vacation days," Shelby said. "Donna's already signed off, fully approved." She looked at me. "Right? Fully approved," I said, and took a calm sip of sweet tea. Buck looked at me across that table. It was a look long enough to communicate something he could not say out loud. I held his gaze just long enough to be comfortable and not long enough to be a challenge. He went back to his steak. "Have fun," he said, as if it cost him something. It cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. We landed in Paris on Friday, June 6th. Shelby and I stood on the balcony of our hotel near the Seine, and she touched her wine glass to mine. She asked how many days until he calls. 8, I replied. "You sure?" she asked. "Randy gave him 72 hours before he couldn't stand it anymore. I gave him 8 days. I know him better." She smiled. The real one. The one that 6 years of Sunday dinners with Buck Harmon had made rare enough that I kept count. On day 2, I sent Buck a photo of the Eiffel Tower. The caption read, "Incredible city, highly recommend." No response. On day 4, I had Peggy push 3 meetings to the following week, knowing the information would travel through Dale to Buck like water finding its level. On day 6, Shelby sent Constance a video from a rooftop restaurant. Constance sent it to Buck within the hour. She always does. Day 8 was Friday, June 13th. I was on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching Paris wake up when my phone rang. I looked at the screen, then through the glass door at Shelby sitting on the bed. She looked up and nodded once. I answered the call.
Let him speak, while telling a story in the voice of a calm man in his 40s. "Buck," I said, "what in the hell do you think you're doing?" That voice. 30 years of employees had wilted under that voice. He said Preston told him my whole department was running on autopilot. He mentioned 3 client calls pushed without his permission and that I was standing in France eating croissants.
I let him talk almost to the end. "Buck," I started, "don't you buck me. I am the CEO of this company and I built it from nothing." He had not, but this was not the moment. He said he would not have this behavior. "You come back tonight, you hear me? Tonight, or don't bother coming back at all. You're done. We don't need somebody who disappears when real work needs doing. Lazy behavior, sport. Always knew you didn't have the—" I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a real one. Deep, genuine, 6 years in the making laughter that came up from somewhere Buck Harmon had been pressing down on for a very long time. Then I hung up. Shelby was in the doorway. She asked if he said it. "He said it. All of it," I replied. She walked over, took the coffee right out of my hand, drank from it, and handed it back. Outside, the Seine moved the way it always has, slow, unbothered, and indifferent to the kingdoms of small men. "So what now?" she asked. I looked out over the city one last time. Paris in the morning, gold and ancient and completely uninterested in Buck Harmon or his 30-year kingdom or whatever he was throwing across his office right now on Skidaway Island. "Now we finish our vacation," I said, "and then we go home and take everything that was always ours." We had 8 days left. Neither of us wasted a single one. There is a specific kind of silence that greets a man who just got fired over the phone in Paris and chose to finish his vacation anyway. I know this because I walked back into Savannah on Sunday, June 15th, and that silence met me at baggage claim, followed me to the car, and rode shotgun all the way down I-16 like a hitchhiker who knew exactly where we were going. Shelby drove. She always drives when something important is happening. She says it keeps her calm. I have always suspected it is because she likes being in control of the vehicle when the world outside it is about to catch fire. "You ready?" she asked, merging onto Abercorn Street. "I've been ready for 2 years. That's not what I asked. I looked at her. "Yeah," I said, "I'm ready." She nodded and said nothing else, but her grip on the wheel loosened just slightly. I noticed, and I did not say anything about it either. That is 20 years of marriage working the way it is supposed to. We did not go to the office that day. Sunday was for unpacking, regrouping, and letting Buck Harmon marinate in whatever he had been cooking since Friday. I had learned over 6 years that the most powerful thing you can do to a man who needs control is give him silence. No calls, no emails, no groveling, just nothing. And nothing to a man like Buck is absolutely deafening. Randy came by that evening with a bottle of Blanton's and the energy of a man who had been waiting 8 days to hear a full debrief. "Walk me through it," he said, settling into my armchair like he owned it, which he basically did given how many hours he had logged in it. "Start from the phone call." So I did, and when I got to the part where I laughed and hung up, Randy covered his face with both hands and made a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a prayer. "You hung up on Buck Harmon," he said. "I did, mid-sentence." "Technically just before the end of a sentence," I added. "Yes." He looked at Shelby. "Is he always like this?" 20 years, she said, pouring herself a glass. "You get used to it." Randy raised his bourbon to Section 14, subsection C. We drank to that, all of us, and for about 45 minutes sitting in our living room in Ardsley Park with the ceiling fan turning slow overhead and Savannah doing its warm June thing outside the windows, everything felt almost too easy. I did not know it yet, but easy was about to take an extended leave of absence. Monday, June 16th was day 1 of the rest of Buck Harmon's life, though he did not know it yet. I put on my best suit, the charcoal one Shelby picked out 3 Christmases ago that Buck once called a little much for the office, and I drove downtown. I parked in my usual spot in the 1 Savannah Center garage, took the elevator to the 18th floor, and walked through the glass doors of Harmon Equity Partners. At exactly 8:59 in the morning, the reception area went quiet the way a restaurant goes quiet when someone walks in and everyone recognizes them but nobody wants to be the first to speak. Lola Crane, my secretary, was at her desk. She looked up and her eyes did 3 things in rapid succession: relief, panic, and then the professional mask that she had spent 15 years perfecting. She was good, but I was better. "Morning, Lola," I said. "Mr. Johnson," she said carefully. "I wasn't sure we'd be seeing you today." "Why wouldn't we?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and glanced down the hall toward Buck's corner office. "Mr. Harmon called a department head meeting for 9 o'clock. "Perfect," I said. I love department head meetings. I went anyway. The conference room on the 18th floor has floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the Savannah River, which is a beautiful view that nobody actually looks at because Buck Harmon fills every room he enters the way weather fills a forecast. He was standing at the head of the table when I walked in, reading glasses on, a stack of papers in front of him, looking every one of his 78 years and refusing to acknowledge a single one of them. Hank Prudhomme was to his left. Preston, always positioned exactly one seat closer to Buck than everyone else, was to his right. Carol Stanton, the board's swing vote and the only person in that room whose opinion actually mattered in the long run, was at the far end. She was scrolling through her phone with the focused disinterest of a woman who had seen everything. The room had 7 people in it. It had 8 when I entered. Buck looked up. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment. The man did not flinch. 78 years of absolute authority had given him a face that simply did not register surprise in any visible way. What crossed his expression instead was something slower and more deliberate. Recalibration, like a chess player who just watched the opponent make a move he had not expected and now was deciding to be impressed or angry. He chose angry. He always chose angry. "Craig," he said, "the way you say the name of a dog that has just chewed through its leash." "Buck," I said, "the way you say the name of a man who does not know he is already lost." I sat down and helped myself to the coffee carafe in the center of the table. I poured slowly. Nobody said a word. Hank Prudhomme was nipping at his notepad with the intensity of a man trying to telepathically communicate that he wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. "You were terminated," Buck said quietly, which was somehow worse than loud. "Over the phone," I said, "while I was on approved vacation." "Yes." I took a sip of coffee. "This is good. Did we get a new blend?" "This is not the time for—" Hank started. "Hank," Buck said, and Hank stopped immediately, which was the most exercise Hank's spine had gotten in years. Buck kept his eyes on me. "You were terminated. That means you don't work here. That means this is not your meeting, and that is not your coffee. And I'd like to talk to Donna." Silence. "Donna Merritt," I clarified, as if there were multiple Donnas and I wanted to be specific. "Your head of legal counsel. I'd like a meeting with her this morning. I have some questions about my separation. HR questions. Routine stuff." I said the word routine the way you would say it about something that was absolutely not routine. Buck stared at me for a long moment. His jaw was doing that thing it does. That slow, grinding thing that Shelby once told me he had since she was a child, usually right before something in the house got very loud or very cold. "Get out of my building," he said. "Sure," I said, standing and buttoning my jacket. "Tell Donna I'll be at the Rusty Anchor. She knows where it is." I looked around the table. "Good seeing everybody. Carol, love that blazer." Carol Stanton pressed her lips together very firmly to conceal something that might have been a smile. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Buck say something to Hank in a voice like gravel under a boot. I heard Hank scramble, and I heard the door open and close. I walked to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and rode 18 floors with the calm of a man who had been waiting 2 years for a Monday morning. Donna Merritt called at 11:47. I was on my second coffee at the Rusty Anchor, which was technically not open yet, but whose owner, a wide man named Sal who owed Randy a favor from a story I had never been fully told, had let me sit at the bar in exchange for a conversation about the Braves bullpen situation. "Craig," she said. She had the voice of a woman who delivered bad news so many times it had become neutral. "I think we need to meet. I suggested that this morning." "I know." A pause. "Not here. Not at the office." That pause told me everything. Donna Merritt was Buck's lawyer in the way a surgeon is a hospital surgeon. Employed there, professional loyalties intact, but ultimately governed by a code that superseded the employer, and something in that pause told me she had spent her morning reading documents she had not read before. Specifically, I suspected a founding charter from 1987. "You've been doing some reading," I said. Another pause. Longer. "Where are you?" "The Rusty Anchor." "I'll be there at 1. She hung up. I looked at Sal. "You got anything to eat back there?"
I stood in the kitchen in the charcoal suit while Savannah did its slow, humid morning thing outside the window. Shelby came downstairs at 6, saw me standing there, and did not say good morning. She just walked to the cabinet, pulled out 2 mugs, and poured coffee. "Today," she said. It was not a question. "Today," I replied. We drank in silence. It was the most married we had ever felt in 20 years together, which is saying something considerable. I arrived at 8:40 with my outside counsel, Victoria Ree, referred by Donna Merritt. She was 53 years old, with 38 wins from 41 cases, and the kind of woman who walks into a room as if she has already read the ending. We rode the elevator to the 18th floor. Lola Crane looked up, saw us both, and reached for her phone. "Don't bother," I said. "We know the way." Buck was at the head of the conference table. Hank was to his left, Preston was to his right, and Carol Stanton was at the far end with a legal pad, gladding glasses, and the patience of someone who had been waiting for this particular meeting longer than she had admitted to anyone. Victoria distributed 12 bound copies of Section 14, subsection C, without ceremony or preamble. The room read. The room went quiet. Buck's jaw started grinding. "This is a stunt," he said. "It's a clause, Mr. Harmon," Victoria said, in the tone of a kindergarten teacher correcting a child who genuinely knows better. "A legally binding clause in your own founding document. Mr. Johnson was terminated without documented cause after 6 years and 4 days of continuous full-time service. The threshold was 5 years. The math isn't complicated. I want Donna in here." The door opened. Donna Merritt walked in and sat exactly in the middle of the table, not on Buck's side and not on mine, which told the room everything. "Tell them it's unenforceable," Buck said. Donna looked up from her portfolio. "The clause is enforceable. I've spent 3 days looking for a way to tell you otherwise, and I cannot find one." She said it the way doctors deliver hard news, clean and final. "I'm sorry." Something moved across Buck's face that I had never seen there in 6 years, the specific expression of a man who has just run out of room. He turned to me and he made the mistake that men like him always make when the walls close in. He went personal. "You never belonged here," he said, his voice low and controlled, the voice that had made Darlene excuse herself from dinner tables for 20 years. "I gave you a job because my daughter asked me to. You have been a passenger since day one, a well-dressed, ungrateful passenger, and you want to stand there and claim 18% of something you had absolutely nothing to do with building?" "Dad." Every head turned. Shelby was at the back of the room. She had been there the whole meeting, sitting quietly in the corner where everyone had assumed she was one of Victoria's associates. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the center of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had been waiting 44 years to arrive at this exact moment. Buck's face did something complicated. "I watched you make Mom excuse herself from the table," she said, quietly and evenly, "every Sunday for 7 years. She'd come back 20 minutes later with her eyes too bright, and you'd just keep talking as if she didn't matter enough to pause a sentence for." She stopped 5 feet from him. "I watched her pack 2 bags and drive to Charleston because staying had become something she physically couldn't do, and then you spent 2 years punishing her for it." She looked at her father the way you look at something you have finally decided to put down. "You gave Craig this job out of pity and called him sport for 6 years and told a room full of people he was one of the good ones, like he needed your validation to exist." Her voice never rose. That was the devastating part. You built this company on your father's money and your employees' dignity, and today it cost you everything because you fired your son-in-law from Paris on a Friday the 13th because a photograph of the Eiffel Tower bruised your ego. She paused. I love you because you're my father. I have never once been proud of who you are. She walked back to her seat. Carol Stanton cleared her throat. All in favor of recognizing Mr. Johnson's equity claim under Section 14, subsection C? 7 hands went up. Buck sat in silence. It did not matter. He was already finished. The rest happened the way real consequences always happen. Not in one moment, but in accumulating weight. Peggy Tillman walked into Victoria's office Friday morning with a 4-year-old manila folder that made Victoria go very still. By the end of that week, 11 former employees had come forward. Wrongful termination, hostile environment, and a discrimination complaint that had been waiting 14 months for exactly this kind of momentum. Each case was individual, but together they formed a